Hey guys, welcome to my channel and also my planty home. So today, tips for a nicer looking plant home. Along the way, I will definitely be inserting as much footage as possible to show you like before and afters of how these small little tips can make a huge impact on the way a planty home looks. And I know everybody's style and preferences are different, but these are just my little things that I keep in mind as I'm placing my houseplants and styling my houseplants. All I know is that I love the way my house looks now as opposed to even a year ago. So it has come a long way around here. I have been on a bit of a decluttering journey this past year, and where before my first son was born, I really wanted to live in a jungalow planty coated home. I do love the feel of that. Now that I have two kids, there's just so much that goes on in a day. It's really hard to maintain that level of plants. These are some of the ways I've kind of like spread my plants out to make it feel a little bit more nicer. You know, these kids be getting into everything. They get into everything. So I try to keep as much as I can out of reach, out of the attention of my littles. So that's just like an outside factor, I guess, that I won't really be talking about too much throughout the rest of this video. Okay, let's get into the tips. So tip number one, get creative with potting. Talking about the actual planter itself that you're going to be putting your plant into, I like to try to be really creative with this. Think a little bit outside of the box. What I think to myself when I'm trying to pot a plant is, how can I pot this in a way that's unique from every other plant in my collection? Some examples of this would be, I have a plant that I've potted out of the drainage hole. It's a UFO planter, so the plant like hangs down out of that. I like to use unique things as planters that you at first glance wouldn't be like, oh, that's a planter. I also like to pot into really weird shaped planters. So right now I have a thing for very tall, skinny ones, but I also try to find like varieties in my planters. I also really like the like bulbous planters, so I try to find a variety of every kind of planter type in between. So really the world is my oyster with this one. Any vessel, whether it has a drainage hole or not, is fair game when it comes to potting. Especially as somebody who likes to thrift for 90% of my planters, I try to keep a really open mind when shopping for planters, and if I think a plant could look cool into it, I will buy it, bring it home into my collection, and have it on hand for when a plant needs to be repotted. Tip number two, I guess, is more how I like to pair a plant with a planter in a more basic sense, because obviously more thought goes into it than this, but at the basic level, if I have a very chaotic, kind of wild looking plant, I do try to keep the planter it's in a bit more simple. Some examples, this Ripsalis here, it is a very wild, wonky, kind of chaotic, messy looking plant, and I just think it looks a lot nicer with this more simple, clear glass dish planter that is definitely not meant for plants. But hey, remember the open mind thing. I kept an open mind and I love the way this looks now. I just think that putting a very wild looking plant with a very messy planter oftentimes looks a little bit messy, but that's just my opinion. I know that there are definitely exceptions to this rule for sure. That's just the basic guideline I try to follow, and also vice versa. If it's kind of a more boring shaped, simple shaped plant, I do like to pot those kinds of plants with more busy planters. Example, my baby Pilia peperomuides, I keep in a very busy planter that has like naked cherubs and baby goats all over it to keep it a little bit more visually interesting, where there maybe isn't as much going on with the plant. Don't get me wrong, Pilia peperomuides is beautiful with the really round leaves, but this planter just helps, I don't know, it just like elevates it. To me, it just gives it a little bit more interest where it was a little bit lacking, like shape-wise. Tip number three is to display plants in levels. Something I never really kept in mind in the past as I was building my plant collection and also displaying all these plants on every single flat surface in my house is a lot of the plants that I was buying and displaying were all the same like size and height and sat at the same level. So windowsills, for example, when I would put plants on my windowsill, they all were just kind of the same height, which can kind of work in some cases, but generally speaking, I do think that plant displays look a lot nicer when kind of everything within that display is sitting at different heights, and especially the plants that are right next to one another are kind of like in tiers. So this is another really cool thing about thrifting. It's super easy to find little saucers or I don't know, any little things that I can use as stands for my plants to help create these layers. Looking at my plant shelf just right behind you, actually, I use a few different things to help create this. So example, this top shelf here, I have that same Ripsalis I was talking about earlier sitting on top of a kind of like taller saucer. So it sits a little higher up than the plant it sits next to on the shelf, which is this little Sansevieria in a planter I made. I sell these on my plant shop, the foliage fix, if you're interested. I don't think I have any in stock right now, but I'll definitely be restocking here soon. I'm in a planter making mood lately, but yeah, this saucer just helps the plant sit at a higher level so that there's a little bit of like level interest there. Also, the other side of this top shelf here, I use, oh, is this morbid? Is this weird? I use my dog's ashes as a base at the bottom where these Burroughs tail succulent sits, and then also my cat's ashes on top of that where this little baby mini Sansevieria sits, you know, to help create some of those layers where normally these small little planters, which are actually nail acetone Dappenticious, would kind of get lost in the clutter of my plant shelf. You know how I used to do it in the past, like these little small plants just would not draw an eye at all, but using these pet ash boxes, as weird as that is, as little like layering things really helps keep it visually interesting from a distance especially. So yeah, but there are definitely a lot of examples of this in my house. Here off to the side, I have my aloe vera sitting on our, it's like on top of a thing that is meant to block kids and pets off from the stairwell. When we're not using it, I use it as a bit of a side table for my couch where I keep this aloe vera, and normally I would have to keep this aloe vera on the floor and it would kind of get lost in the shuffle, or on a plant shelf it would also kind of get lost in the shuffle. But using this, gosh, what are they called? Stairway blocker thing as a side table like creates a really more interesting display for this aloe vera, and it catches the eye a lot more than it would sitting in a lot of other situations. Same with my Cebu Blue back there. I have it sitting on a bench as a plant stand to help elevate it. This plant isn't a 10-inch planter, so it can be really, so the bigger a plant gets, it can be really difficult to find a spot for it, but using a bench as a plant stand like this to help elevate it does draw a lot of interest. Same with my lamp stands, kind of creates a bit of a layered look. Going back to tip number 1 in a more creatively like potted displayed way. Thinking outside the box, again. That's what it all comes down to, I think, at the end of the day.
That makes me laugh.
Yeah, will you please go play with Rai so I can finish filming my video?
Yeah.
Oh, do you got your toys?
These are called liners.
If your plants don't have a lot of size variety in themselves, create that size variety like illusion by styling it in levels. Stack something underneath, use something as a plant stand. You could even like flip a basic terracotta planter upside down and use that as like a little bit of a plant riser to help create some of that size difference illusion. Another huge tip I have, especially in collections where maybe a lot of the plants are a smaller size or very similar size-wise, shape-wise, is to give the plants space. For me, this one has been really, really hard over the years to like overcome because I collected my plants so fast, and like I was saying before, I really just coated any flat surface in my house with plants that it just kind of looked like a sea of plants. Everything kind of blended in together. Whatever direction you would look, it was just like a sea of plants. a blob of green. I used to have my IKEA shelf over here and it just didn't look good because I just coated the shelf, filled the shelves with as many plants as I possibly could, and it was really hard to appreciate each individual plant for what it was. And I found myself ignoring plants all the time. Things would kind of get lost in the shuffle. I found I was having a lot of issues with the overall health of my plants, but also it just looked messy. It really didn't look good. So that is something I have learned to keep it a little more to a minimum these days. Back to my aloe vera example here, when I used to have it sitting on my IKEA shelf, it wasn't a plant that ever really stood out to me, but since moving it to its own little space here, I appreciate and love this plant so much more. I can really take in its beauty and be like, wow, that is such a shapely, cool looking, unique plant. Like with any plant, if it's just in a blob of plants, it's not going to stand out. It's all green. It's all shades of green, you know? It's not going to stand out. So I do think that spacing things out, giving them their own zones to really shine and give the full possible effect that they can has made such a huge difference. But also keeping things a little more spread out does help a lot with pests and their ability to spread from plant to zone, and really just overtake a house. Before I spaced everything out, I was having so many issues with pests and them spreading just like through my entire collection like that, and now it's not so much of an issue. I still do get pests. They do definitely stay more maintained to their zones, and I keep things in zones like my Dracaena aloe zone, my IKEA terrarium and plants on top zone, my plant shelf countertop plants zone, and my lamp plants slash that pothos zone. Like, they're spaced out so it's really hard for pests to spread, is my point of that, I guess. Tip number 5 is to keep a variety. And I know this tip isn't really for everybody, but if you're like me and you really like the jungalow feel, I do think this is a really beneficial way to go about buying plants and introducing plants into your home. So at first I was super drawn to the Hoya and, you know, vining like pothos, philodendron, those kinds of plants. And it did just kind of start to look, I don't want to say boring because it was still really pretty in its own way, but as somebody who is going for that jungalow look, I do think having a lot of different shape, like plant varieties, goes a long way in creating that jungalow effect without having to have as many plants in my space. I keep going back to my plant shelf example, but it is the example I'm just looking at right behind where you're sitting. So it's just easy for me to look at it and give it as an example. But even my shelf downstairs, like on this one plant shelf, I have philodendron, ripsalis, cactus, sansevieria, euphorbia, peperomia, ascananthus, pilia, syngonium, you know, and the combination of all those plants does leave my plant shelf looking a lot more interesting than before, when a lot of the varieties I kept on the shelf were the same kind of looking plants, you know, like a whole bunch of hanging plants all together just kind of blends together. But if you're able to like break up those plant displays by using those different looking varieties, it really draws the eye. It makes it a lot more like fun and nice to look at. I don't know, let me know what you think about that. Let me know what you think about all of these. I am like all ears if you agree or disagree. I'm very happy with the way my plant collection looks right now, but I am very intrigued to know where y'all stand, or especially where y'all stand on my tips. I want to know whether you agree or disagree. So if you're somebody that likes a really busy kind of home look, this is definitely like, I would probably minimalists aren't like collecting as many plants as you and I are. So I assume that we all kind of like a really busy look, but I do think that even with less plants, it creates kind of that busy look that I personally really enjoy without as much maintenance in a actually super busy collection where there's maybe like so much going on every flat surface. Yeah, makes it easier to maintain, looks good. Tip number 6 is to customize your display for the individual plant needs. There are so many examples I can give for this. Off the top of my head, something that looks really good, I think, for plants is to use toppers. Topping a plant with, say, bark or vermiculite or pebbles, whatever it may be that you decide to use or that I decide to use, just looks a lot more crisp. It just does. I don't know what it is. It looks a lot better than just like substrate sitting on the top of the planter somehow, but you can really tailor this for your plant's needs. Example, my plants sitting on top of my cabinets here where I'm not always wanting to climb up there to water them. I've actually topped those with pebbles to help hold moisture down around the roots, which prevents them from drying out as much. So in turn, I don't have to climb up there and water them as much. Also, this Dracaena here, where I'm not ready to pot this up yet because I haven't found a planter big enough for this one. It's already in a 12-inch. It's just gonna be a whole thing to repot this. I've topped the substrate in a couple of inches to help fill that in and make it look a little bit more crisp than it did before. And also it helps hold in moisture. Where this plant is definitely root bound in this pot, it holds in moisture, which is really, really helpful. I do have a few plants that I've topped with, like my super chunky pumice, which is always linked down in the description box. But I do like to use the super chunky pumice or the super chunky perlite on top of my succulents for a more crisp look. Also, like saucers fit into this category. I recently got rid of it, but I had this fern sitting in a clear glass vessel that really helped hold moisture in around the root system, which helped to keep the plant happy, but it also looked really nice and helped make this basalt kind of basic looking planter stand out a little bit amongst the crowd. So this is something that thrifting comes really, really in handy for. I freaking love thrifting because it's like when I'm just shopping for something new, it's really hard to go to all the different shops and see like what's available. I like this, this, and this. Should I just buy this, this, and this, even though they maybe look really similar to one another? But when I'm thrifting, it kind of leads me to think a little bit more creatively in my plant displays. I guess this is tip number 7, which is to level up plant displays by thrifting or buying secondhand, going to those secondhand shops, because it is so fun and rewarding to buy something that was going to go to, that was somebody's trash basically, and then be like, oh my gosh, this is my treasure. Like that saying, one man's trash is another person's treasure. Like I have so many people's trash in my house right now, but I think it looks really good. And maybe that is an unpopular opinion. Maybe you don't think my plant display looks good. That's totally fine. I'm really happy with the way it looks. So at the end of the day, that's all that matters. But there's just something about finding a vessel at the thrift store and then finding what I feel is the perfect planter or saucer, you know, whatever combination to go with it. Like it is so easy to buy planters new at the store where there are bulk options available and be like, okay, I like this planter, I'm gonna buy 5 of them so I have 5 of them on hand to pop my plants in. But to me, that's a little bit boring. It's fun to go thrifting and find one of a kind. I mean, I know they're not really one of a kind because at some point somebody bought this product new, but it just makes it feel a lot more one of a kind and kind of like kismet, honestly. I'm like, okay, I found this thing. How am I going to really fully like accentuate this thing or accentuate a plant with this thing? You know what I'm saying? I just think it makes it really, really fun. There is no feeling better than finding something cool at the thrift store. Honestly, to me, there really truly isn't. Like, maybe when my kids were born, that was more exciting, but finding a good thrifted planter or vessel that I will be using as a planter is like number 2 for sure. It just feels like a lot more rewarding, which is why I do enjoy buying secondhand so much. In my opinion, we do not need to be supporting these massive retailers who are just spitting out new, creating so much waste in our world when there's so many cool things that have already been made. And a lot of my planters are actually unique, one of a kind that I've thrifted, and I wouldn't have been able to find these products unless I actually took my booty to the thrift store and spent the time searching through. Yeah, a lot of crap, weird, ugly products in my opinion, but every once in a while you find a gem and it feels so good. I am not like 100% against buying new For example, this planter I bought new and I seriously love it, but I think that by thrifting, I've kind of been able to narrow down what my personal style is, because when I find something I like, I can kind of think to myself, what is it I like about this thing? Is it the shape? Is it the size? Is it the color? Is it the material? Is it the texture, the pattern? Or if I find things in my cart and end up putting them back, like what reasons did I have for putting these products back? And that helps me kind of narrow down and figure out what my own personal taste is and what my color preference is, what my shape and size and whatever preference is. I don't know, I just really think it has helped me learn a lot about my own personal style, which, yeah, I would say my own personal style is very earthy, kind of like grandma-y or eclectic maybe. I don't know if eclectic is the thing, but I do like to have a lot of visual interest going on. What I found is I don't like visual interest in the way of colors. I more like visual interest in the way of shapes, sizes, and texture. Those are the kinds of interests I like. If it's like a hot pink or a hot blue, it's not something I'm actually really going to end up using. So I've just, like, now I know to not even really consider those products. I mean, if the right thing popped up, I probably would consider it, but I'm much more picky about my own tastes now when I'm buying things. So when I buy something new, I know it's something that I'm absolutely seriously going to love. And this is just a good example of that. I love this planter. I think it's a really great combo for this aloe vera, and I feel no guilt about this because I know this is something I love and I'm going to keep in my collection for years and years and years. Like, I will probably still have this when I'm 80. Mark my words, I'll have this when I'm 80. Hopefully the aloe is going to grow out of that pot, so something else will live in there. But it is something like I will keep forever, because I now know what I like and what I actually will use. Whereas at the beginning, I was just kind of buying whatever I saw, liked off the top of my mind, but then as I thought about it more, I didn't end up using it. Now I've learned to stick to certain colors, shapes, sizes, textures, patterns, all of those things. So yeah, those are all of my tips for creating nicer looking, more interesting plant displays, but also in a maintainable way. I know that I like planters and really deep saucers to help make my plant maintenance a lot easier, because I do like to have as many plants as possible that I am able to appropriately maintain. Those are just a couple of things that make maintenance a lot easier because they help hold moisture a lot more. It all kind of goes hand in hand, you know, the maintenance and the styling. So I keep getting snagged. I'm taking it off. This settles it. I'm taking it off. How many times have I snagged myself on this dress, which also was thrifting? Isn't it cute? I think so. I feel like a little like tennis girly. Pretend there was a tennis racket there. Where was I? Yeah, those are all my best tips. I would love to hear what your best plant display tips are. I know I've asked for this kind of feedback in the past, and a lot of your information that you shared in the comments helped me kind of narrow down my own personal taste. So I really truly appreciate every single one of you that has helped me through the comment section on my channel. I appreciate you so much, and thank you for spending your time with me. But I hope that you got something from this, or it maybe inspired you to kind of try to find out what your personal tastes are, because you know, like, that's the thing. I think a lot of us can see the beauty in a lot of different styles and setups and, you know, those kinds of things. But just because we can appreciate the beauty doesn't mean that we necessarily need that same thing in our own homes or our own plant displays or our own styles, you know, whatever it is. We really just got to narrow down what is for us in our own personal lives, and just kind of like not ignore what other people are saying or doing, but maybe just get inspired by it and draw it into ourselves so that we can like shine in our own unique ways. Was that cheesy? Yes, but it's so true. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna shut up now. I could talk on and on about this. I really, really could. But that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me today. I had a really good time chatting about this. It is something I feel very passionate about. So thank you for clicking and watching today's video. And yeah, I will see you next time.